Hey folks, I'm really sorry about this, but this podcast is slightly glitchy. I've had a nightmare with this one. I wasn't happy with the original episode, so I re-recorded it with, I thought, much better content, but that content has been beset by, I think, an aged cable, which means that my voice occasionally just drops out a little bit. I really didn't want to have to do it again, so I ran it by the good burgers of Patreonville, who had a listen and said, yeah, you can hear the glitches, but it doesn't, you actually get used to it. So I'm going to release this as is, because otherwise I'm going to be stuck. I'm going to be living longer than Ashildir, just having to do the same thing over and over again. And I want to move on and get some other episodes out there. So I'm getting this one out. Apologies for the dropouts. It won't happen again. And I bought a new cable. That's what I'm recording this on. And I hope you can get through it. And normal service will be resumed hereafter. Thanks for bearing with this one. Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary in which I, Toby Haydock, watch a story chosen by a friend of mine and try to commentate and make observations whilst trying to guess what my special guest's favourite things about each instalment might be.
Hello, Toby. Hello, everyone. My name's Joel Ahrens. You may know me from a previous edition of this very podcast where I talked about the girl who died. And well, that's it. You don't know me from anything else, literally nothing else. Like I said before, I'm a fan, an Aussie fan, which I guess makes me a little different, I suppose, but I'm in no way directly connected with the show or even peripherally connected with the show. I don't have my own podcast. I don't write any books. I feel that my 45 years of being a fan gives me the credentials to discuss it in some way. So here I am. And surprise, surprise, I'm back. And I am talking about The Woman Who Lived.
Well, welcome to Happy Times and Places edition. Has been a long time coming. I'm sorry if you've been waiting eagerly for the conclusion to the Girl Who Died, Woman Who Lived saga. One of the reasons for this delay has been that this is the rare occasion of a Happy Times and Places redux, where I've decided to have another bash. I wasn't wild about the original one of these that I did back in October 23. I put it on Patreon and people were very kind despite my enunciated misgivings. But in the build up to this coming out, I felt I probably should do it again. Not because, I can't actually remember what I chose, so I'm going to be re-choosing all over again. I've watched the episode again last night in prep for this. But more because of the mood that I was in, some of the things I reflected upon, and a couple of things that I got wrong as well, which I will address herein. So I just thought, in the end, I may as well just go for it and redo it, rather snip bits out or do caveats at the end and blah, 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 blah. So I'm not going to cheat. I've nothing to gain by cheating. I genuinely can't remember what I chose last time, and more importantly, I can't remember what my guest Joel Ahrens chose. So I'm going to be coming into this with no foreknowledge because my addled old mind. Well, this is what some of the subject matter of this episode alludes to, about remembering who we were once, and in my case, where was it? October 2024. So let's start with comments from the inhabitants of Patronville on The Girl Who Died, which I'd been a bit down on. I didn't eviscerate it, but I was a bit down on it. Philip Fitchett says, for me, I feel that you've earned the right to be negative about an episode if you feel that way, Toby. After all, your opinion is still very generous, well-tempered and reasoned out, so it's still enjoyable to listen to, and a total antithesis to the dark and shouty negativity you see plenty of online. Anyhow, these podcast editions are still like a lovely warm bowl of soup, to different flavour. Oh, okay, thanks. I like the bowl of soup analogy, Philip. Thank you. Joe Llewellyn says, I love the 9th series. Always happy to have a Moffat-era story. I liked both parts of Girl, Woman, Died, Lived, two-parter. Toby, you always do better on these than you fear. I think Joe is there alluding to the fact that I always make apologies for new series episodes. I can't drop in as many facts and observations because I don't have as many facts to my fingertips, and the observations aren't based on 25 rewatches, at least, as some classic series episodes. John Deere says, I think you get a point for this section thing. You both chose the same thing from slightly different directions. That is down to my choice of things and Joel's. So Joel and I share a point in John Deere's eyes, and I accept that. Joel himself says, I think Toby put it very well that although there are differences in Dad's Army model versus Seventh Samurai model, however, I did say that if Toby chose the situation without actually referencing the Seventh Samurai, I think a full point is deserved. So Joel is chiming in with John and saying, I deserve a point for episode 1. So you go and alter your official scores, those of you that are keeping them in a book, for what it's worth, says Joel, which is probably very little. Loved the experience and it was a great listen. Don't do yourself down, Joel. Your opinion is worth a lot. James Curray Smith, the mighty Jim Myth, says the ratings jumped up out of nowhere with this episode, which I've always slightly worried was because we had a bunch of people over for the weekend. So like 11 people watched Doctor Who at our house. We had our box at the time, and the ethnic mix of our household meant it might have done rather more heavy lifting mathematically than it could support. And Joel says, Joel's just being excited about listening. And then for this episode, where, as I said, I'd done rather a downbeat commentary. Fitchett once again comes in and says, thanks for this. The low ebb won't last too long and you find yourself on a good wave again. Please try to be kind to yourself there. Because I was just honest about being slightly down. I think slightly reactive. Oh, and there's a comment here from Siobhan Galichon, who in betwixt then and now is sadly passed away. So Siobhan talks of Rufus Hound here, one of this episode's guest actors. Rufus was possibly the best person I've ever interviewed. My God, a force of nature. I was left hanging on for dear life. Lovely man. Siobhan also added, damn, I knew I should have chosen the signature tune when I did my Happy Times and Places. Oh, is that because is there a spoiler there? Does Joel choose the signature tune? I won't be. Jonathan Evans says, Doctor Who is as much about how it impacts on our lives as individuals as is about the minutiae of stories. This is a brilliant commentary. Oh, thanks, Jonathan. Well, the listeners to this won't be able to hear it, but they can because it is on Patreon. The original commentary, I've nothing to hide, is on the Patreon. I just for a wider release, I think I'm gonna try and be a bit more upbeat. Andrew Wilson, less up my own arse. Andrew Wilson says, if I'm in the right mood, I can describe Series 9 as my second favourite in the new era. There is normally a weak one for me, and for me it is this one. The other stories all have charm. Despite the cop-out end, Face the Raven, Heaven Sent and Hellbent make such a great finish to the series. Stephen, but not that one. There's another one telling me to be kind to myself. Blah, blah, blah. A great episode with Joel, and besides, I think it's far more entertaining to listen to a thoughtful and heartfelt discussion than one with a less authentic, if relentlessly upbeat tone. Thanks. Well, yeah, I'm not going to be relentlessly upbeat about this, don't worry, but I'll just try and be slightly more chipper. Joel, that's Joel. Yeah, I better not read them too close because it looks like he's talking about what we voted for, which I still don't know what they are. And Russell says, Russell Parker says, my best mate is in this. He's a Bristol-based teacher who signed up to do an extras agency for a bit of fun. First job was in this. When the director chose him for a bigger role, he's the bereaved king, was told he was Edward I, a.k.a. Edward Longshanks, don't you know. Ended up chatting with his wife, Maisie Williams, in her dressing room on her 18th birthday, while she Instagram pictures of her birthday cake to her bazillion followers, saying, this is crazy. I was just watching you in Game of Thrones the other day, and now I'm here. He's not even a prop fan. So when he texted me about all this, I was bloody livid. Also said director was in the band The Vapors with my sister-in-law's uncle. So yeah, this one is a bit of a confluence of what the flippery random connections for me. I did enjoy, though, not mentioning my pal's extra-ing work and making sure my other not wee half was watching this as it went out so I could enjoy her reaction to spotting him popping up entirely unanticipated. That was fun. Aha. Well, what connections, Russell? Well, yes, indeed. Ed Bazalgette, the director, was in the band The Vapors, but I didn't know that Russell Parker, who's a chum and an inhabitant of Patronville as well, but Russell and I have known each other for a long time. I didn't know his sister-in-law's uncle was in the band, so that's exciting. What a small world. Anyway, let us now go towards the climax of this particular two-part, a strange beast, but one that has very odd connections for me, which will cause probably a slightly different timbre of reflections to as I normally do in Happy Times and Places, but but I've got a particular note to self to not allow me to be too maudlin, which I think I was a little bit on a previous iteration of this, which is why I've decided to do this one again. And I hope that's all right with you. And as I say, if it isn't, the other version is on my Patreon feed. Anyway, we will press play. I'm watching on the iPlayer in 3, 2, 1. Now, the reason this is a particularly weird one for me, listeners, is because as well as being, as well as more importantly than being a podcaster and a general sort of Doctor Who nerd, my principal love in life is the acting profession and being a member of it and doing acting. Acting is my favourite thing to do, and I consider to be the thing I am best at. Everything else I'm just chancing my arm at. And I, as an actor, auditioned for this episode of Doctor Who. And I auditioned for the role of that bloke, the man who's just said, I will not be some lone ranting cavalier, and I did that in the audition. But it was a long way to get there. I had auditioned for Doctor Who before. This isn't actually the last audition I did for Doctor Who, but it was a funny one because it came through. My agent was very excited, and she said, "I'll put you up for the part based on the description," and then they saw me for it. And then she sent me the script, and you'll notice with this guy is that he doesn't do a lot. It was sort of sold as this is a good supporting part, and it's not a bad part. And the guy that's playing him, John Vos, is a very accomplished and experienced actor who any program we're lucky to have, and has done some good work on television. But when we got the script through, most of the guy's action was there's actually a line cut here when the doctor says, "I'm the doctor," he had to think, "Oh yeah, there's something wrong with my heart." So even if I had done it, my lines would have been cut. But a lot of the role is off camera. Anyway, we'll talk about that maybe when the scene comes. So anyway, as you'll notice, I didn't get it, but I remember there were actually photos of there was quite a photo session of this particular scene. And so when the episode was being announced, it was like, the part I was up for was kind of all over the place. There were a couple of pictures of John Vos, and actually the carriageman, the man who's what's he called, the coachman, is an actor I know very well called Gareth Berliner, who is also a comedian. In fact, started as a comedian and then turned his hand to acting and has had loads of good work. He was a sort of similar character in Coronation Street. He's a good bloke, Gareth, and he's been around a long time, but he came later to acting than me. So when I saw that in the scene, I could have been in the scene with my mate. That has also happened with I was up for a part in The Crown that they left me hanging on for ages and ages, and I didn't get it. And then when I saw who did it, that person was acting in a scene sitting next to a guy that I know really well, and texted my mate and said, "If I nearly got that because I think I was down to the last 2 for that one." And I said, I'd have been working with you, so I not only miss out on a thing, but feel you still have a connection with it because actually your mate is doing the other bit. So anyway, yes, this was one of my attempts at being in Doctor Who, or was it? But anyway, I was up for this episode and I didn't get it. But had a nice time going in to see. Derek Ritchie was there, as did Bazalgette, and as was Andy Pryor, the casting director. But I didn't get it. But that's not, I don't hold that against the episode. And in fact, I have to say, when I saw the episode, I wasn't overly sad that I wasn't in it. But there's mixed feelings because obviously I still haven't been in Doctor Who, and part of me goes, well, I'd have rather have been in an episode of Doctor Who. I don't think it's all that great than never to have been Doctor. Is it better to have been in a not very good episode of Doctor Who than never to have been in an episode of Doctor Who at all? So what? And I did feel this episode didn't quite come together, but this happy times and places. So we have to look for the positives where we can. I'm surprised we haven't really had much to do with highway people, because me is not a... And in fact, when I got the script through, I wasn't quite sure. I wasn't sure it wasn't Missy, because it was mysterious about who me was. Now, in light of what I know now, it makes sense. I was just misinterpreting, but there was part of me that thought, oh, is this Missy, this me character, this M? But it wasn't. But of course, I hadn't read or knew nothing about the story in the Viking village. I like this sort of nighttime stuff. I think Peter Capaldi treats this situation very, very well. He's very good at showing the impact and the import of dangerous or sad situations. He looks like he wears it quite lightly, but because he's an older man and he's an obviously intelligent, very smart man who feels stuff, he can show you the weight of stuff without getting emotional about it, which is kind of what I like in my Doctor. And obviously I'm now recording this, which I didn't when I or did I? It doesn't matter. But in light of what we now know about Doctor Who, the character, and the latest incarnation, whose emotions are worn on his cheeks in the form of lachrymosity, I think I prefer a stoical Doctor who's the weight of the universe is there behind the eyes, not pouring out of them. But anyway, I'm sure I am going to do shortly a commentary on a Ncuti Gatwa episode, so we can talk about him then. I love the lighting in this episode. There's a lot of night shooting, which I think is nice and atmospheric. I love Doctor Who in a period setting. I think, and I think Capaldi fits into this, even though he's a very cool man, actually, isn't he, Capaldi? He can make a sort of casual type look still seem rather doctorish and not slovenly or modern, because he's got was that Edward? That was Russell's friend. Now, I kind of like this. They do it with economy. I like the trotting through history. It's done with a few extras and hats, a couple of close-ups, and that's very effectively done. I'm afraid I don't really feel it from Maisie Williams. She turned 18 doing this. It's hard. It's a bit like it's a bit like Romeo and Juliet, isn't it? When you're young enough to play the part, you don't have the life experience to pull off the requisite emotion and complexity. And when you have the requisite ability with emotion and complexity, you're too old to play the part. Obviously, it needs a young person to play the part. And she was absolutely fantastic in Game of Thrones. But I don't get from her what I do get from Capaldi, and obviously it's easier for him because he's an older man, that the pain of the long life and the huge the gravitas, I think, is deeply important to the characters of Doctor Who who've seen it all, and it's how it's how the massive universal themes sort of resonate and reverb around these stories of time and space that are not stories about being sad that your next door neighbour doesn't love you, or being angry with that journalist, or being pissed off with that liar. These are stories that tremor on the edge of the universe, or deep into our souls. That's why I do think Doctor Who at its best is like Shakespeare. Now, I'm not comparing writing or anything like that, but just in terms of the stories are big, the emotions are big, and so it needs something slightly more than sort of naturalistic playing. Naturalistic playing can work in certain circumstances, but I think there needs to be a theatricality to the depth of the emotions, if you like, and I feel I don't get that with Maisie Williams, which is a big flaw for me, unfortunately, with this with this episode. I also don't get I don't get the impression that there's a vast intellect at work with me. I don't know if that's to do with the writing. I don't know if that's again to do with the fact that it's a lot to ask of an 18-year-old actress, but I don't. It's a because I think you can do something sort of slightly atonally or slightly matter of factly, but somebody like David Warner was very matter of fact sometimes in his delivery, but behind him was the fragility and the intelligence and the depth. So I'm not saying I needed histrionics, but I do need some deep down that I don't feel I get, because the writing of this is lovely. Catherine Tregenna, of course, writes Torchwood and is a hugely experienced writer, and it's nice to have another writer on board. I'd like to hear from her, actually, and I think this is a nice touch, the tears on the Latin, and I think all of this is beautifully shot, all this nighttime stuff. There is something about the English countryside. And well, it's very resonant to me because I was brought up in the middle of nowhere, and you did have, scary tree silhouettes that would sometimes scratch at your window. So I love that. But this really appeals to me, this idea of somebody that has lived such a long life. I mean, I'm only 51, but I'm getting to that point now, and it is a terrible thing, aging, because you realise how long and how short life is at the same time, because some things that seem like they happened yesterday were 30 years ago, and some things that seem like they were 30 years ago happened last week, and both of those things can be true. I can feel like I'm terribly old, but also wet behind the ears at exactly the same time, and it's a really weird experience, and I can understand why people get the sort of middle-aged blues, midlife crisis. I haven't bought a Harley Davidson, but I like this, by the way. I like the idea of the creature in the woods that she's conversing with. I think this is all nicely placed, that she obviously has ulterior motives, and she's keeping something from the Doctor, and she's playing upon the Doctor's inherent goodness, which is I think it's sometimes nice to see the Doctor's decency used as a weapon against him. That's a clever use of the show's format and central character. But that thing about she had children and she lost them is a terrifying thing. And of course, when I was reading some fool the other day moaning about on the internet, about vaccinations and saying they're terrible things, somebody pointing out, but before vaccinations, one in 4 children, I think, weren't expected to make it past the age of 5. The more the child mortality rate that people just got used to just a couple of generations ago. I mean, my grandfather was one of 13, and I think did one of them die in infancy, and one of them I think died at 11 or something. But there were these huge broods, and some of the kids, and it was a sort of occupational hazard almost of parenthood, of having a child who didn't make it. And you can see how that made people sort of tough but sad at the same time. And again, you can be both of those things, pragmatic about what life deals you and you have to get on with, but also probably deep down rather sad, racked with loss. And I think that's an interesting duality. And I think drama sometimes, will show one side and think, well, that's somebody's character. They can't be two things. And I think that's why the Doctor is such a fascinating character, because he's funny and principled and decent, but can also be sad and testy and burdened, like Quatermass, that thing about being, an excited pioneer, a quester, but also somebody burdened by guilt. These are interesting characters. Now, I'm fascinated by because this is a bit midlife crisis-y, isn't it? The Doctor in the sunglasses. But I actually think the sunglasses are quite fun, but only because it's Peter Capaldi, because he's cool. He reminds me a bit of my uncle, who was also from London. You see, my uncle's from London, and that's why he was cool. They had pesto and everything. But my uncle he wasn't in a band, but he is quite musical, and he's always look pretty good, dresses well. He's a smart guy. And he's a film editor, so he once met Tom Baker in a lift, and and he'd met Boy George and things like that. I think he did a video for Culture Club at one point. But he's quite an effortlessly sort of cool man in a kind of laid back way. I think Peter Capaldi is cool. I think he pulls off the specs. I think he sort of pulls off the electric guitar. It's not, but I know some people who hate that. I think it's quite daring. But I certainly think the specs work. I think Capaldi carries them off. I think he's a terrific actor, but he's also got so much about him, actually. And yet, I also think it does smack of a midlife crisis, which, listener, is currently what I'm going through myself. But I also know that if I wore that outfit, I would not be able to carry it off. There is something about Capaldi that means he can carry off things that mere mortals like me cannot. And that's the sort of quality you want in a doctor, really. That's the sad thing about, there can sometimes be about, a show where people, are attracted to wearing the costumes of various characters, because there are certain characters whose costumes I would love to wear, but I would look rubbish in. Because I'm a bit overweight at the moment, but even if I lost that weight and was actually a decent shape, it's not about size or shape or anything like that. It's about whether you can. My brother he's only a couple of inches taller than me. He used to dress from Oxfam, and he has excellent posture, and so he can wear sort of second-hand clothes and really good in them. And if I put them on, I'd look like I'd spent the night in a hedge and robbed the corpse of a recently deceased cast member from the local circus. And that's a shame, and that makes me sad. I would love to be cool, but I think Capaldi is cool. He's also funny. He's quite childishly funny. So here we are. This could have been me. I'd have carried off that hat, though. I'm a nightshirt and a hat kind of guy. I think I could have carried this off. But what happened when the email came through was, you're up for this. It was fantastic. Well done, my agent. I'd been nearly up for a part in Doctor Who before, but I will talk about that when we do Robots of Sherwood, where I found out I wasn't actually going to be up for it before I found out I was up for it, because it all unfolded in a timey-wimey way whilst I was at the Doctor Who convention in America. This is not what happened here, so remind me when we get to Robot of Sherwood. However, I did go up for this, and I did go to the meeting, but my agent, when the script came through, or the sides came through with just the bits for the role, said, actually, this isn't as good as it sounded. Have a look, see what you think, and have a look. And you'll see all these great lines actually happened, and it said in the script, OOV, our review. So you've got all these lines, which they said when they say the part, there's loads of lines, good part, blah, blah, blah. What it didn't say in a breakdown is they largely take place while there's dialogue going on between two people in a chimney. So when we actually got it, it was like, this is not as good a part as I'd hoped. And of course, for years, people said to me, "Oh, well, Toby, it's all right. The reason you haven't been in Doctor," and that's it, he's gone. The reason you haven't been in Doctor Who is because they know who you are, and they're just waiting for the right thing to come along. And I was like, no, they don't know who I am. Bless you, they don't know who I am. These are people who work in the great land of television. There's loads of actors out there. They don't know who I am, and that's fine. But then it got to the point where they do know who I am, and I'd met Stephen Moffat at this point, and Andy Pryor, because I'd been up for and got a different part in An Adventure in Space and Time. That's a story for another day. So Andy Pryor knew what I could do. I'd done a good audition for Adventure in Space and Time for the guy that's inside all the monster costumes. Rufus Hound here, by the way, and when I saw Rufus was in this, I went, "Oh, has he got the part I was up for?" Because Rufus and I have been up for similar things that he got, so I've always had a bit of kinship with him, but he's obviously a much bigger league than me, because they wouldn't have seen me for a part like this, which is a shame. But yeah, for a moment of extreme misjudgment on my part, I thought, maybe Rufus has got the part I was up for, which is absolutely fair enough. No, he got a much better part and a much bigger part, and probably wouldn't have even auditioned for the part I was up for. So that was a blip from me. me, but I think Rufus is great in this. And one of the reasons I wanted to re-record this was because I mentioned, I think when I first recorded this, that I had suggested Rufus to Big Finish as the meddling monk. I went and I thought, well, before I do this again, I'm just going to check that that's true, because I'd give myself a bit of credit for that and going, see, I've got a footnote in Doctor Who history somewhere because Rufus plays meddling monk for Big Finish. And actually what happened was I'd got a text from Lisa Bauman asking if I had a contact for a quite famous comedian. And I said, I don't, but I know somebody who does. Robin Hinson probably does. I'll put you in touch with Robin. And she said, yeah, because we're looking for somebody to play the meddling monk. And I said, oh, well, if the person can't, what about Rufus Ann? And I remembered that. And when Rufus did it, I thought, you see, I'm a mover and a shaker. And I've looked back over the text, and her reply to that was, well, actually, that's Rufus is Dave Richardson's first choice for the role. But and I can't remember why they were checking out the availability of the other comic. But Rufus was top of a list, and maybe different people had different lists. But so I did suggest him, but he was already top of somebody's list. It was absolutely nothing to do with me whatsoever, apart from the fact that I said his name. But I think in the previous commentary for this, I'm there taking the credit for the whole thing to make for the fact. Come on, a boy's making up for the fact that he's not a Doctor Who. This is now, and I also have a story about this guy, Struan Roger, wonderful actor who has an excellent voice, which can only be gained, I think, from and I think I have seen him smoke, because when I was on the way to interview Anthony Calf, who's in The Visitation and latterly Empress of Mars, when I went to interview him in the theatre when he was in the West End, I was running a little bit late, and I ran past Drew and Roger, and I think I even tweeted, should I stop and interview the face of Bo before going to see the guy from The Visitation or whatever, because Drew and Roger is the voice of the face of Bo, but here playing quite an elderly servant, and I don't have him down in my head as an elderly, and I think he's aging up a bit, because for this he's not as sort of infirm as that performance suggests, but he's a wonderfully voiced actor and has done loads and loads of stuff. So again, he's doing quite a small role really for an actor of his stature. So our misgivings about the size of the role they were only misgivings in the sense that when you get a shot at something, obviously you want the best chance you possibly can, and sometimes it can be a dilemma, because you go, well, if they see me for this small part, that means if a much better part comes up in 3 episode time, I won't be offered because I've already done the old one, and that has happened to me and to obviously other of my agents actors in the past. Or it could be, well, if I say no to this, they never offer me anything. And in fact, we have had a thing where we turned down something else that was quite small, and then never got seen for anything again by that particular bunch. So it's a tricky one. So basically, the long and the short of it was, my agent said, do it, and do it really well so that you impress them, but don't get it, which sounds like contradictory information, didn't it? But I did. You go and you do the best job possible, but kind of hope really that you don't get it. And I didn't get it. But I also still haven't been in Doctor Who, and now that Doctor Who's future looks very uncertain, would I have rather had been in Doctor Who, albeit in an episode that nobody really talks about, and certainly a part nobody talks about? I think for my own self-satisfaction and to feel like I'd achieved my childhood goal. And I don't have the excuse now that, they don't know who you are, Toby, and they're just waiting for a great thing to come along. They do know who I am. They weren't waiting for a great thing to come along at all, and I'd have been lucky to get whatever I was offered. This is Ariane Bakare, who, since I recorded this, has of course returned to Doctor Who with a story in the engine, with a good part. But this is quite a good part. I think a lot of his lines have been added in post, especially because I think he's got big teeth. I do like the lion design. I don't mind Doctor Who monsters being, and this is sort of slightly fairy tale like, but I don't mind my Doctor Who monsters being sort of animal like. It's quite Russell T Davies, isn't it? But I like the cat nuns, the Jadoon are quite fun. I mean, the fact that isn't he called Leonardo, and he's also from the planet Leonie. I mean, they've really gone down in the naming state. He may as well be called Lenny. But because isn't it? Whatever he's called, he's Leon something, and he's from the planet Leo thingy. He may as well be a landlord of a lion bar as well. They've really lent into it very heavily, but it is a good design. The eyes are funny though, aren't they? I do like those glowing eyes when we first see him and he comes through the door. But they do look a bit like just the ones that flick on and off that I think are terrible in Planet of the Daleks, because they're perfectly round and I think they've been done in post, haven't they? But they do look a bit too perfect. But anyway, I think her coldness here in when compared, because we have to remember that this Doctor started off being quite sort of pragmatic and casual, potentially about human life. That's quite a nice effect there. But the Doctor, to show compassion for the elderly servant, and to show that that time has not ground down his, want of a better word, humanity. He's not human, and the Doctor shouldn't be human, but he should still have the empathy that obviously a long life can rob you of. Because if you see that human life is fleeting, if you live forever, something that lives 70 years is kind of nothing. And this makes it a bit of a companion piece to School Reunion, which I did very recently as I record this particular instalment. And again, it may be my age, but I am fascinated by how life is and I've wasted this week. Interestingly, I've had loads to do. I ended up wasting yesterday because I was feeling a bit tired, and I'm getting a bit old now, so I've worked quite hard. I've had a book out and I've been in a play, so I can have a day off. And then I just sort of sat on the sofa doom scrolling, and I was like, what? You get one life. What I'm doing, and there are some people in the world right now that don't have the opportunities I had to have to see things, to go and see that play, or to try that food, or make that thing, or do that thing, and I've just wasted my time. But then you think, but also, being alive isn't the freedom to waste our time. It is incumbent upon us to enjoy our life, even if that's doing nothing, because anything I do isn't going to have a great impact. Everything's going to be dust 100 years' time. So I may as well enjoy being me here in the present. But it's something that I ponder on quite a lot. And Lenny the Lion, we just call him Lenny the Lion. See... She comes across, sadly, to me as slightly more petulant than she does hurt, damaged, ground down by time. And she's undoubtedly a good actress, but as I said, it's not a performance that quite works for me, and that to me is maybe at the heart of my problem with this episode. But there are the other bits that don't quite. I don't know why we get these two funny guards. I normally like a funny guard, and these lads are perfectly good. But yeah, that is noon, and he's sort of he's ringing it for all now, and I do like it. I was listening to a podcast about the film Dr. Phibes the other day, and talking about how every character is played by an actor who gives a bit extra colour to it, and I love things, and I love those old films and old telly where actors had to make an impression with us in a small role, and you go, oh good, you're working hard and you're making it interesting. So I sort of approve of the methodology, but for some reason he's brilliant, Struan Roger, but it doesn't, I don't know, the fun guards didn't quite work for me coming in here, whereas normally I would approve of them, and maybe in an episode I liked more, I'd go, and the icing on the cake is that even the guards are funny. It's just, it seems tonally slightly askew, although they need to be, because the Doctor has to run rings around them, as we will see, and they've got I think they've got the nice line, haven't they, about £20, and I show you where £30 is, and I think that's quite funny. So they need to be slightly sort of guileless, but I'm not sure. It doesn't feel like everyone's in the same thing. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not gonna criticize. I'm not gonna criticize the actors because they're not doing anything they're not doing anything wrong. They're doing what is being asked of them by the production. It just all, I don't know. When they came in, it particularly that he's hanging at noon bit and the sort of expression and all that. It just felt like we were suddenly in a different thing. And again, if it was an episode I like more, I might accept that. So I've never said I was consistent. I think this bit is brilliant, partially because I'm a stand-up comedian and I understand the pressure that that Rufus Hound's character is under, where he's got to keep them laughing despite the fact it's not going particularly well. I mean, I feel seen, and Rufus is, of course, somebody who has done stand-up. He's another, like Gareth and like me, Gareth, the coachman in the first scene. I mean, so lots of, obviously, so that's interesting because they were obviously looking for comedic performers for this one. Maybe to, well, because you've got a highwayman, you've got period setting. I think when you have a period setting in Doctor Who, it does it no harm to make it a kind of picture postcard version or a literary pastiche version, to give it sort of colour. Particularly if you've got highwaymen and baying crowds, you kind of want all of that stuff. But I think Rufus Hound does this really well, where he's doing he's telling jokes for his life and he's putting on a good front, but he's allowed those lovely close-ups where you see the little flickers of doubt in his eyes, and I think that's really nicely done. And I think Rufus Hound is brilliant. He's as I say, I've encountered him a handful of times and always found him very affable, and naturally charismatic, and I think I probably slightly wished I had some of his effortless charisma, because then I might have got some of the things that we were both up for. And he's had a good career, and I think has not always gone the path that he could have easily gone had he wanted to. But I think he's great in this. Her costume is fantastic, isn't it, as well? I love those red gloves that she's got. So it is a bit like playing some terrible weekend gig where you haven't got the audience on your side, and you just desperately try to keep them laughing and not killing you. So it's and I think this is a nice idea for an adventure, that it tests. It tests the Doctor's morality to the limit. It creates a moral dilemma of that this thing needs to be opened with death, and we don't know yet. I mean, we assume because the Doctor said, Lion is probably up to no good. But I do like the idea of moral dilemma, saying, well, one life, and again, because poor old me has lived such a long life, well, one individual life is actually nothing in the great scheme of things. And one of the great things about Doctor Who, the Doctor, is that the people that he meets are special. Even I'm not sure this executioner would have been able to read, so that's where there's an issue with it. I thought when I watched it again last night, I thought he was going to go, can't read. But anyway, it doesn't matter. And this is horrible, isn't it? This brief idea that we have, it doesn't come to anything, but that actually, because the crowd are really pissed off, they haven't had the hanging. They go, why don't you hang that bloke instead? And again, having spent yesterday on Twitter, you can see how quickly people's rationality and humanity can desert them when mob rule takes hold. Now, when I watched this sequence yesterday, I did slightly kind of hone in on again where this was slightly problematic for me in terms of it being a satisfactory episode, because suddenly everybody starts behaving in ways that are there for the script but not for Ella. Why did he tell her now you're not going anywhere? Why doesn't he carry on the ruse for a bit? Because he hasn't the last of the Leonians. Yes, the Leonians, the lions. So I don't know what's he doing now. Why is he suddenly going and tormenting various supporting actors? Because he still needs his plan to work. None of these people are in any way a threat to him, so he's sort of turning his back on the two biggest threats to his plan. He reveals really early on that he's been duping a shielder, and he's letting the Doctor and her do whatever it is that they need to do, whilst he's sort of terrorising featured extra number 4, terrified woman or whatever. And in fact, here we don't know what he's doing at all. While they do the let's talk about the important stuff here, but it is nice that these two get to kind of work together, and she sees the error of her ways, and I think that whole idea of somebody whose moral compass is pointing in the wrong direction because of the various buffets of a life long lived is very interesting story wise. And all of this, I actually used this sequence to test the settings on the new soundbar on my new television, because when he says they will kill me for this and spare me my brothers, and that's slightly awkwardly stated as well. You have to have if your sound is a particular setting, you don't really hear any of this. But that's a whole thing about how sound settings are done on modern televisions and how often the settings favour the music and not the dialogue. And it felt to me like some of that dialogue had maybe been added in ADR in order to explain why Leo the lion's people kill him for the failure. But it suggests to me, if his eye was on his plan rather than on the random extras, who looked scared enough anyway at the bombardment from the stars, he might have not been killed by his own kind who, seems to me kill him in order to tidy up the plot as much as anything else. But so I think that's a slightly slightly unsatisfying sequence there. Love all this period stuff. I think we filmed in a pub not unlike that when we did Count Magnus for Mark Gatiss. There's a few places around England that are these sort of small period places that are very useful to cram crews in order to manage to film a scene set in the past. But again, the lighting here, I think the lighting has been superb throughout this episode, and there's been a real contrast between that beautiful daytime that they had for the hanging scene to these firelit interiors, to the nighttime stuff, to the stuff in her library, And we don't get a satisfactory answer to what happens with Sam Swift, do we? Is he going to be around forever or not? We never find out. And I think you can't play too fast and loose with that stuff either. But it's it's an attempt to tell. I think an attempt to tell a story about what time travel can do to a person, and a lesser person than the Doctor is we need the mayflies. I think that's actually a really interesting perspective that the Doctor has, and so there is a moral to this story which I rather like. Appreciate life for the small beautiful things is what life is all about. And as I say, as I get older, and I do like. Me does, so I don't remember that, or I was a different person. And I look at some of the things I thought when I was younger, and I thought fervently, and I believed so firmly. I was still the same person. What's life done? Has life made me less idealistic, or has life made me wiser? Well, one of those things is a positive spin, one of those is a negative, but it depends which direction you reverberate them. Was it that the younger me was correct, and because you get I think you do get a bit more pragmatic as you get older, and actually that youthful sort of exuberance and passion and I think one does get a bit more, conservative with the small c as one gets older as well. And is that because you're getting wiser, or is that because life's beating the humanity out of you? I don't know. I like to think I'm still a decent person and the same person, but one that's just comes up with different. I know it's serious. I'm by no means a right wing person, but I think some of the things I thought lived passionately when I was in my 20s and 30s are absolutely bonkers now. And I have chats with my children who are now in their 20s, and I think they're wonderfully idealistic, but absolutely unhinged. But they probably look at me like an old dinosaur, as has happened from time immemorial. And so what this does to that is it sort of stretches it out. And I'm not actually to reduce it to politics is to underestimate actually what's behind some of this. Because it's actually what's fascinating about it is, how many of those pieces that made up our younger selves do we still have? As I say, are those changes good, or are they bad, or are they just natural and there shouldn't be any value judgment about them? Why is it that sometimes I feel that life is short and precious, and sometimes I think it's long and exhausting, and that both of those things can be true at the same time? I think it's fascinating, and I think that's a fascinating way to tell a story, actually. And so I think it was a worthwhile endeavour to tell this two-parter of what happens with this character. I just think there's some tonal issues with the way that it's carried off, and I'd also think the central guest performance is perhaps does not have the depth that it requires. Although I think that's a really haunting way to end the story, it's an interest. I think it's a fascinating idea, and it wrestles with some really interesting stuff. I just not sure it quite comes together to be a story that I will. Maybe, of course, maybe. And this is the beauty of it. As I get older, and I contemplate that I have less time left to live than I have lived, maybe this will speak to me on a different level once again. It's spoken to me very differently this time, doing this in June 2025, than it did in October 2023. But then I was just in quite a bad, sad mood, so I spent most of it moaning about the fact that I've never been in Doctor Who. That is still something that weighs heavy on me. It's still, it's the one thing more than anything that I've ever wanted to do, and I've not managed to do it. So contemplate my life, at the heart of it, the fact that I have failed to do the one thing I've ever wanted to do. And this story is a stark reminder of that, because it was one of the occasions where, had I done things differently? Maybe not. Maybe I never had a chance of getting it, because often, people choose parts for... Well, no, I had a chance of getting it because I was in the room. And that would have been me, Mr. Fanshawe, Toby Hadoke in another universe. But John Vos is a fine actor. It's actually always quite nice when I was up for something recently, and Roger Sloman ended up playing the part. I still ended up being in the show, actually, but not doing the part I'd auditioned for. And it was Roger Sloman from Nuts in May. And I remember saying to my agent, "Well, there's no dishonour in losing out a role to Roger Sloman. He's a legend. The fact that I'm even in the same." Then you go, but then part of you goes, so what's the bloody point if I'm going up against people of that quality and heft? But I suppose the business being such that if it is a level playing field, because it has such a short memory, I think Roger Sloman's the one who's probably got more right to be angry and disappointed than I have, because he's like, I'm still competing for nobody's like him for a role, and he wasn't like that at all. But so it's all about perspective, isn't it? But it's also all about making the most of what you've got. And I like to feel that even though I am an inherently quite a sad man in a number of different meanings of that word, and that it's never far away from me that I'm a huge Doctor Who fan who does a lot of Doctor Who stuff. And actually, indeed, since the last time I recorded a commentary for this episode, there has been an episode of Doctor Who where 3 people were cast as Doctor Who fans, and one of those people is a friend of mine, Steph Lacey, who's been to this house several times, who is not a Doctor Who fan by any stretch of the imagination, and in fact had already found out she got part, but she's very good at keeping secrets, as she'd been asked to do by the production team, so she didn't tell anybody, including me. She was in my house when she just got a part in something else, and her career's going very well. And I said, "God, you're probably going to end up in Doctor Who at some point." And I said, "If you end up being in Doctor Who before me, I'm going to kill you." And she already knew then she was in Doctor Who, but not only that, she was playing a Doctor Who fan. In fact, when I sort of mentioned it online, Russell T Davies said, "Yeah, she's playing us," i.e. me and him, i.e. Doctor Who fans. And I go, "Yeah, I can't even get close to being in the show when they're casting people to play Doctor Who fans." And it ends up my friend playing the role, who, as I say, has never played. She's a wheelchair user who campaigns very strongly for genuine disability representation on the television. So nobody who's not a wheelchair user should play a wheelchair user. Well, I think nobody who plays a Doctor Who fan should play a Doctor Who fan. She was doing geek face. It's a protected characteristic. Anyway, no, I jest, but I did think that was quite funny. But so there's always much as I love Doctor Who, there are always reminders within it of the central failure in my life, which is nothing to do with me being a fan, really, but me being an actor. I'm an actor, and I'm an ambitious actor. I want to act all the time and be in things and be in good things. And, of course, the best thing in the world is Doctor Who, so, of course, that's an ambition of mine. I've been lucky enough to be in many, many big finishes, but I've not been in Doctor Who on the telly. And, oh, gosh, well, and the way the show stands at the moment, maybe I've missed my chance. But had I got the part in The Woman Who Lived, would it have wiped out any of my the seam of angst and pain and melancholy that runs through me? Of course I wouldn't. I would worry that I'd said that line badly, or that they'd cut that line, or that that I could have done a different part, or that I would have always carried things with me, but I would still been I'd been legitimate. Ladies, I'd have been canon. Anyway, let's crack on with my favourite 3 things about that episode. I will say my favourite 3 things about the episode are I did have a glance at what Joel had put underneath when the previous iteration of this, and so I've got a feeling I chose Peter Capaldi, and I think I have to choose Peter Capaldi for this. I often overlook the series' main stars, but I think he is such a good actor, and what he brings to this particular episode is that weightiness, is the idea of a life long lived, but not with any histrionics, not with any huge displays of emotion. The fact that he can do all. I love actors who can convey a lot whilst doing nothing. I mentioned David Warner before. He's great at that. Ben Kingsley is great at that. I think Capaldi has that. He has that wonderful sort of cragginess that Broughton has, that Baker has. There's something sort of majestical yet kind of worn. He's like an ancient monument, really. And I think that is really important to the success of the elements of this episode that works. The idea of a life long lived, and the fact that he can carry off shades, which I could be a really naff idea, and they're not in his hands. I think he's brilliant, Peter Capaldi, and I think he suits this episode. I also I think Rufus Hound is very good. I think he does the stand up stuff on the gallows very well, and they're very sympathetic. Those close-ups that he gets that shows that he's fighting for his life, and he's rather sad about it, and he knows that his days are numbered. But it's a good performance that works. He does the 2 things that are required. He's funny, he's charismatic, a character that you grow to really like, even though he's got a very, very short actual screen time. But he's more than just a turn. He's more than just charisma. He shows he gives the requisite drama that makes you know that the character is sad and fears for his life and all that. And I think the central idea of what a life a long life lived, a life that deals you blows and means you get used to people dying. I mean, I'm a today. I mean, I've said this before, but friends joke with me when I get sad because people have died. They say, "Yeah, but your social life to revolve around actors whose heyday were in the 1960s." I know a lot of people who are in their 80s and 90s. I know people that I know or have encountered die quite regularly, and that makes me sad. And and you don't ever quite get used to it, but I don't. It's not like I bawl hysterics now when somebody I knew or encountered dies. You're sad about it, but it's not like it was 20, 30 years ago where it would be, quite a big emotional wrench. You do sadly get kind of inured to it. It doesn't make it any less sad, but you acknowledge it and you process it in different ways. And it's got a regular occurrence, and that does sort of chip away at you, and that can either make you go madly sad, or it can turn you into an unfeeling automaton, and the way to negotiate life is actually to set a course between those two things and navigate that as best you can. But I think that's a really interesting idea. It's a great use of Doctor Who's time travel premise. The consequences of that on a character, and I think all that stuff, the journals and the Latin and the tears and the lost babies and all of that stuff, and the Doctor feeling great compassion for me is really, it's nicely written. It's a really good idea. So those are my three things. I don't know if I'm supposed to do three things or a bonus. I can't remember. But Peter Capaldi, Rufus Hound, Sam Swift, that and that central premise. Joel Ahrens, what has he come up with? And I seem to recall last time I chose the lion, and I do quite like that design, but I was disappointed in myself when I did it because I knew there were better things to choose. But maybe I chose Peter Capaldi as a bonus thing. I'm sure it's just three things and three things when it's a two-parter. But let's see what I've told Will to do, and if I need to come up with a bonus, then I will. But I'm hoping that those three things will do. What are Joel's?
So the first favourite thing of mine about this episode, I'm finally talking about Ashilda. Now, Toby, I'm assuming you're probably shocked that I didn't even mention her in the last episode, but I wanted to save her for this one because it's this episode I think she really comes into her own. And specifically, yes, I'm talking about Ashilda and not Maisie Williams, who I think is a fabulous actress, plays it so well. But it's really Ashilda, or rather the idea of her, the character, that I just find really compelling. She's the woman trapped in a girl's body, which has shades, I guess, of Claudia from Anne Rice's vampire series. She sees friends, lovers, family live and die. It's utterly heartbreaking. Her whole arc leading into the finale at the end, I just find riveting. And I find that they really thought through her character well. They really gave her justice, and by they I mean Moffat and all the writers that had anything to do with her and her, because there was a few writers that had their go with Ashilda. I love the fact that in this episode she is, well, mostly having fun in this episode, and how she ends up with the Doctor not being a friend of the Doctor, but not committing to be an enemy. There is, again, that shade of grey that I love. Should be no surprise for me, loving this sort of character. I love at the end how the Doctor says that he'll have to keep an eye on her, and she says, no, I'm keeping an eye on you. It's my job to clean up after you. And I love that. I think it's fantastic. So, Ashilda, she's my first favourite thing.
Interesting. I mean, I chose the idea, didn't I? So it's up to you whether I get a point for that or not. And as I say, I promise you, I couldn't remember at all what Joel had chosen, so I'm going purely off. Not just this watch. I watched the episode again last night in order to do a run-up to watching, commentating on this episode. But of course, that central idea of the character. But for me, I couldn't choose the character because for me, the big failure of the episode is that I don't get that from the performance, and I'm really sorry about that because I think Maisie Wood is absolutely terrific in Game of Thrones. really, really good. That's the only other thing I've seen her in, and she's superb in that. Um, and I can't imagine who else you'd cast. At that time, you're right, we need a young woman who's got, skills with period drama and, is has abilities beyond her years, and can deal with a hefty telly part and give it weight, and a sort of steely pragmatism that her character in Game of Thrones has, and it just, as I said, didn't quite the depth of feeling, the wisdom of ages, the melancholy of a brutally long life is there in the writing, but I got more sort of petulance. Really, I got younger emotions coming through. So I would have that to me is an element of the production, that the key element that didn't quite work for me. So I applaud the idea and the writing of it. It just didn't quite work in execution. So whether I get the point for that or not is entirely up to you.
My second favorite thing is the concept of memory being a finite thing. There were some, I remember back when the Snowmen first aired, who were upset that Matt Smith's Doctor did not seem to remember or recall very well the events of the Web of Fear, the Great Intelligence, the London Underground, all of that. He didn't seem to remember it much. And I know that bothered a lot of people, but it never bothered me. The Doctor is extremely long-lived, and I'm sure his memory as a Time Lord would be great. But I feel like the Doctor's character has lived longer than maybe most Time Lords. And so his age may be long, but that doesn't mean that his memory doesn't have limits. And the very conscious decision to make Ashilda the same. I mean, she lives so long, but she has a human's memory. She likes to chronicle things, or she'll know that she'll forget them. She rips pages out because there are some things that are too painful. It just gives her character such richness and respect. It would be very easy to have Ashilda's character be very one note, which I sort of feel like sometimes Captain Jack is. The fact that she's got this whole history that she alludes to, and the fact that she's a woman gives it a different spin than Captain Jack. I just think it's fantastic. I love the fact that she's played by Williams, who's barely past being a teenager herself at this point, and she's playing someone who talks about having had past husbands and family and children, and it just hurts too much to think about, and she plays it really, really well. So that's my second favorite thing. It's that idea that memory is a finite thing.
Now, can I just say, Joel is very apologetic about himself in his introduction, saying, "I'm just a fan. I'm nobody important." Joel's contributions to this have been really exciting and interesting to me, and I think that's an absolutely brilliant choice, really effectively put as well, and insightfully so. And Stephen Moffat's take on memory is interesting, isn't it? Because I've never been wild about the timey-wimey thing. Although actually, I think this is a great use of the Doctor Who's time travel format. I feel sometimes Steve Moffat's era leans too much into it, and especially when it uses it in a sort of Bill and Ted cheaty sort of way. But I remember when one of the DVD extras was sort of rounded off the story of the Doctor and River Song, and I remember him writing about it in Doctor Who magazine, talking about sort of fractured memories and how sort of timey-wiminess is actually more like, he explained, it's not, being fancy with the concept of time travel in a tricky writing way. It's trying to make sort of time travel like the broken memories that we have, and, our memories are our reality. And yet, for example, my mum and I have totally different memories of the same event. I mean, I know, for example, I was phoned up by Rudolph Cartier, who produced the Quatermass serials, and I had a chat with him, blah, blah, blah. And then I subsequently told that to Mum and said, I thought it was my friend mucking about, and he said, hello, this is Rudolph Cartier from London, and so I told her. And recently I heard her tell it, where she was saying to someone, "Oh yes, and of course he phoned, and this German accent, and this man said, and I thought it was a friend of Toby's mucking about, didn't I, Toby?" I'm going, "No, you didn't." Now, my feeling is she's 82. I remember things because I've got a really good memory. I'm right and she's wrong. But as far as she's concerned, she's right and I'm wrong. Now, I cannot prove that I am right. I sort of know that I am, but she knows that she is too. So then what happens? What is real? Because of course the past is gone. And I think this storytelling that we have in here and other there are other examples of what Stephen Moffat's trying to do with the show and with time travel that I think are actually really interesting and make me a bit more forgiving of the fact that because my sort of stock answer is, you shouldn't, there's too much messing around with time travel within stories in the Moffat era, and it's not really what I want from Doctor Who, but actually it's an admirable thing to be trying to do with the central format of the show, to say how do fractured memories form reality. And when Joel was talking there as well about the pages being torn out, I thought, God, she's created her own missing episodes. But they're instances in her life that she doesn't like to remember. But also, I've written a diary, and I know that sometimes when I've written a diary, I've kind of written down what I wished had happened, not what had happened, just in case somebody in the future read it and I wanted to. I mean, what a ghastly thing to admit. But I'll be honest. I think there's no point in not being honest. That I have not always, but just on a couple of things where I think where I'd kind of write for an audience, which is because I will never show anybody my diaries but then the vain part of you goes, but if historians in the future do find them and read them, I want them to think the best of me. Even I mean, again, two things being possible at the same time, and I've alluded to that earlier on when talking about time being fleeting, but time also being drawn out and all this. And I think what we lose with the less sophisticated storytelling is only one thing being possible at once: good storytelling and plausible characters and interesting drama and observations is where two seemingly contradictory things are pulling at each other, and and I think that is something, if we're honest with ourselves, that we do. And I think I sometimes will say what I think people want to hear rather than what I really think. Now, is that good? And sometimes I think quite bad things that I would never say in real life and may even act upon. So does that make me a good person because I haven't acted upon those thoughts, or does that make me a bad person because I have those thoughts deep down? But if they are only deep down and I don't do anything about them, then surely I'm a good person because the thoughts never actually manifest into anything bad. But then again, is there a malignancy there at the core, or even hypocrisy? It's tricky, isn't it? It's tricky. Maybe it's all of those things at once, and that to me is what good drama is, when lots of different things can pull and they can all be equally valid. And I think this storytelling sort of leans into it very well. But I certainly don't get another point for that, because I could get a point for kind of either one or either of Joel's points there, but not for both. But he put that very interestingly, I thought, and it was insightful, and we benefit from it. Thanks, Joel. What's Joel's third thing?
So my third favourite thing is a very small moment. I don't think you're going to get this, Toby. I didn't see this until my recent viewing. I don't even know if it's something that you're going to comment on when you're watching the episode. It's almost a throwaway comment when the Doctor and Ashilda are doing their sort of, breaking and entering hijinks. They're talking about Clara at one point, and Ashilda says, she'll die on you, She'll blow away like smoke. And I don't think I've really registered that in all the times I've seen this. This is my favourite season 9. I favourite season of the modern era. I just hands down absolutely adore it. And I must have seen all these episodes who knows how many times. And I'm sure I've registered that consciously at some point, but it just really hit home on that. Like, wow, that is foreshadowing I am loving. It is very throwaway. It doesn't give it a pregnant pause, doesn't make it a big thing. But it does have that kind of premonition that I really love, and really ties different parts of the season together. And if you know what's coming. I think it's fantastic. So that's my final favourite thing there, the premonition of Clara's end.
So he is going to do a bonus thing, so I have to have a brief pause and think of one more thing. But that, I had noticed that line. That is a beautiful... There are lots of nicely written lines, actually, in this episode, and that is one of them. And I hadn't even... like Joel, I hadn't considered that. I hadn't certainly registered tying it in with Face the Raven. So, good observation, and I'm glad you like that bit, Joel. But now I've got to think of a bonus thing before you say your bonus thing. So I'm going to have a little ponder. But of course, it's obvious it's what it's going to be. In fact, I think I've probably got it the wrong way around, because actually Capaldi should have been my bonus thing, as he sort of bestrides the whole story. And indeed, the whole era, although particularly good for this story. And this thing should have been chosen in the main batch, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, the bonus thing and the thing, it's just it only matters for people who care what what columns you put various things. Doctor Who fans care about what columns put things in anyway, irrespective of the column. The lighting this episode, I think, is really, really strong, both the exterior and the interior. I think it really helps with the mood of the piece, and I also think it just makes it beautiful to look at. So I think the lighting, there's the stuff in Mee's library, the nighttime stuff, great shot of the tree there, but some candlelight stuff as well, and then stuff in the pub later, and then actually the daylight is a beautiful contrast when Sam Swift's doing his stand-up routine by the glows. So the lighting for me, I doubt, for me, not for me, I doubt that's Joel's thing, but let's have a look.
And then I've got my bonus thing. So from these two episodes, something that sort of is the umbrella over these two things, I really think there's only two things, or two people really, that you could mention here that we haven't said already. And that's either Peter Capaldi or Maisie Williams. And I'm sorry, I love Maisie Williams, I do. But Peter Capaldi is so, so good. Did we ever deserve such a great actor, such a great character, and such a great ambassador for the show? The quirks, the comedic gems that come from Moffat are brilliant. For me, I do love the guitar playing more mournfully at the end of this. He has the brooding nature of Tom Baker, the innocence of Davison, the irascibility of Hartnell, and the clownishness of Troughton. But through it all, burning intelligence. He's just an amazing doctor. Toby, I've listened to all your podcasts, and I know that sometimes you feel like you take the main cast for granted and you don't highlight them enough. I'm not going to make that mistake. This is my one shot, or two shots, I guess. I've done this twice now, to play this game of yours. I'm not going to make that mistake. Peter Capaldi for the win. He was just absolutely brilliant, and he is my favorite bonus thing from these two episodes, from this season, and from this whole era. Thank you very much.
Well, I mean, as I said, I did get a glance at the comments, and Joel mentioned Capaldi, so maybe maybe that had sowed the seed. So I mean, I don't think this one counts anyway. I think have we got a tie there? But I think the score from the original one should count, where I don't recall winning. So, but yeah. Anyway, I think this one is. This one never really happened. I did. I just wanted to do one that was more cheerful, and so I can't really. And I was 100% honest when I say I couldn't remember what I'd chosen, and I didn't want to listen back. No, certainly not. But what did I get to then? But obviously the previous episode scores. I haven't won. I haven't won. But it's nice that we both alighted upon Capaldi, and we must have clearly both alighted on Capaldi last time, which is what made him write down, which maybe is what tipped me off to choose Capaldi, but I get the sense I probably would have chosen him without that. But I'm going to let you decide. I'm too old for such trivialities to do more than be a bit of a passing interest because of the existential crisis caused by a long life lived. But anyway, good. Nice. And we are very lucky that we had Capaldi. I think he's a brilliant, brilliant actor. I think there are things of his era that didn't gel in a way that I would have hope they did. I remember being so excited when he was announced. I was at Steve Roberts' house with Steve, Sue, and Peter Crocker, and I think we even popped open a bottle of something and we watched that reveal. But there we are. That was 3 doctors ago. Good Lord. You see, I mean, that's the other thing, isn't it? When you're young, there's a new doctor. Oh, wow. It seems like there are ages between different doctors and whole eras. And now they seem to come and go like a summer breeze. Joel's got a few more bits to say.
So normally this is the time that Toby asks his guests to plug something. I'm going to say exactly what I said last time. I have literally nothing to plug. I love teaching STEM and media to kids. I love getting them being critical and creators of media, not just consumers. But I don't have anything to plug. Maybe just to say again, I love being a patron of this podcast. And if you haven't yet and you would financially support any podcast, make it this one. The community that comes around Toby's series of podcasts and just Toby himself, it's just been fantastic. It's my go-to podcast. It's as soon as it's in my feed, I listen to it. And when I first became a patron, I didn't say this last time. When I first became a patron, it took me a year to catch up with all the podcasts that suddenly I had access to, that as a regular listener I had to wait for. So the sheer amount of work that this man does, he's not paying me to say this. I'm paying him, and I am saying this. So I'm plugging him. My Twitter is @JoelAarons. Again, I rarely post. You can follow me if you like. I lurk mainly. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening.
Oh, thanks, Joel. Those are very kind words, and I'm glad I got to listen to them again. I've actually been a bit slow in Patreonville the past month or so because I've had book out and I've been in a play, so and it hasn't helped me to sort of catch up by doing an episode I've already done. But I would rather it was right, and I was happy with what was out there. But that's very kind of Joel to say those things, and Patreonville is very lovely, and I'm really pleased that Joel has contributed to this podcast, because it doesn't all have to be people who work in the industry. Doctor Who fans are an interesting bunch, and everybody has their story to tell, as this episode shows. This episode of this and this episode of Doctor Who, we all have stories to tell, and the lives we lead, reverberate around, and every pebble we throw into life causes a ripple, and those ripples hit other people in different ways. So it's important that how I'm going to carry on this metaphor, that we throw our pebbles in a nice way. That could have been so profound. Instead, it was a bad metaphor. Anyway, I hope some ripples are hitting you, make you smile. And I'm glad I got to do this again. Also, the little passage of time means that we can add another fact, because Gareth Billiner, who you saw the coachman at the very beginning, who's an old mate of mine, who I met first because he's a comedian. He was, and we've done various nights together. But he also knows partner Shirley because he is a disabled performer, so those two worlds have intersected. I did actually interview Gareth, and I've never put that interview out. It was going to be part of Who's Round, and then I'd kind of brought that to a close. So I'll probably bung that out as an addendum to this. The patrons have it already. But a nice little extra note is that since that interview was recorded and given out on Patreon, and since I recorded the previous iteration of this episode, Gareth's, I think wife, they're married, Kirana, has been in Doctor Who as well. So they are a married couple who've been in Doctor Who, because she played the producer in the Interstellar Song Contest advert. So they've both been in it now. So that's another person I know who's been in Doctor Who when I haven't. But yes, so that's a nice little piece of trivia, because there's not many husbands and wives that have been in Doctor Who. I'll do a podcast about that one day, and now we've got an extra one. So there's another reason for redoing this redoing this podcast. But for now, because I've already done this once, and you don't want to keep telling the same story over and over and over again, otherwise you become a sad lurk in the back of photographs. So I hope whichever time and place you're in, it is they are both happy. And thanks for listening, and thanks for letting me do this again, although you had no choice in the matter. But there we go. This has been looming. Because this is why there's been a bit of a delay with this one. It's looming. I wasn't entirely happy, and then I felt the idea of doing it again. It's just, well, I won't. It won't be fresh. It won't be exciting because it seems onerous to do something twice. But done it now. It's over, and hurrah for that. Yeah. Oh God, I felt like I've lived with this one forever. Ho ho. That's apt, is it? So off I go. Take care. Bye bye. Well, thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Joel Ahrens, who is on Twitter, as he says, at Joel Ahrens. I'm grateful to him and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Paul Sama, Paul Gibbons, John Davey, Jasper Ferguson, Richard Harris, the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Town and Wood Beasts, Mel Jones, Nigel Sharp, William Remmers, Peter Burns, James Curray-Smith, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Laird, Christopher Meredith, Gavin McLean, Stephen Moffat, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedson, Tim Harding, Niall Bromley, Paul Cook, Richard Chalk, Peter Devlin, Grant Davidson, John Deere, Chris Dunford Kelk, Paul Dunn, El Pandras, and Ruben Herfindahl. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like to become a patron, and who better to advocate there than Joel, who did it far with. I mean, he was a better advocate for me than I could possibly be, and I'm grateful to him for those words. But if you would like to come in and join the fun, it means you get to comment on the episodes that I'm Happy Times and Placing, so your thoughts can be read out. You also get your name mentioned in the credits at various intervals. The higher up the tiers you go, the more times you get mentioned. But other than that, the tiers are all tiers are equal. You don't get anything else apart from more frequently mentioned in the credits. So you can start from as little as £3 per month, and you get everything that is available to the people who pay on the higher tiers. It's a pay what you can affair, and that's at patreon.com/Toby Haydock. I also have a Ko-fi system for those who just want to bung me a few quid every now and again because they've liked the sound of something or I'm particularly hungry, and that's ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock. I'm grateful to everybody who donates there as well, because I'm a freelance artist and I do this stuff for no fee apart from what you decide to give me. But if you decide not to give me anything cash-wise, that's also completely understandable. I need listeners, and I'm grateful to everybody who decides to spend an hour or so, whatever, of anything you could listen to, listening to this. I am blessed and delighted. But if you would like to help me along the way, what you can do is subscribe, 5 stars everywhere you can, thumbs up everywhere you can, and even a few lines of review really, really help, because there's a lot of Doctor Who content out there, and if you think other people would like to avail themselves of mine, with a little bit of a helping push. Thanks so much. I'm on all the social media page, Spotify is not social media. I do have a Spotify channel. I can't sing. I'm on YouTube. Please like and follow there. At Toby Haydock on Twitter, as well as at Haydock Podcasts. I'm also on Blue Sky. I have a Facebook page, and I'm on Instagram at Toby.Haydock. So, I mean, you can literally have too much of me quite easily if you go everywhere. Go everywhere. Find me everywhere. From TikTok. I ain't TikToking. There we go. Well, glad I did that. And sort of brought it up to date slightly, didn't it? And but things have been. Joel's very kind about saying how prolific I've been, but I have been a bit lax lately, but the patrons have been very, very patient. But I'm starting to get with it a little bit. I've got 4 too much information's kind of nearly ready to go, so I might have to have a real concerted effort with those next week, and then I'll bung those out, in fairly quick succession for patrons. But for non-patrons, they will, it will be a long drawn-out process. I mean, I'm on the Adex. When am I going to get to the end of the series? Well, I don't know. But I've also been trying to have a break because I've been very, very tired. I've had kidney stones. Everyone, I've had kidney stones. They are agony. But you don't. That's not what you've tuned in for. But I tell you what, there was a couple of nights I was up, and I didn't sleep at all. Very, very painful. But I've been very well looked after. And I've drunk a lot of apple cider vinegar. I don't know if that helps, but it did psychologically everything else. It tasted like it was doing me some good, but I don't advise getting kidney stones. I suppose that's another thing about living a long time. Various ailments come to visit. Anyway, never mind that. Never mind lumbago corner or the athlete's foot zone. Let's leave our bodily shortcomings to one side. But anyway, I hope you're all well. And this is, as I say, this has been looming. I was nearly a couple of times just went, put the thing out. Nobody will care. Nobody will care. Nobody would have noticed, really, if I put out the other one. But I wanted to be out there with I didn't want to, I wouldn't have, I think I'd have worried. I worry anyway. I worry everything's rubbish. But at least, if this is rubbish, at least it's not maudlin as well. I think the other one was a bit maudlin. Anyway, it's still there. You decide. But this one's the only one that's going on iTunes. This one's the only one I will entrust to that the general public can be trusted with. Patrons, they can have my nervous breakdowns. That's what they pay for.